Well, it's really exciting to be here with Mary Ceruti, who leads Walker Arts Center. And right as soon as you hit town, I think we met right away.
I believe so, in that first month.
You know, you've got a big job here, but I'm not sure everybody knows what a role you play already behind the scenes on different, we'll talk in a little bit about some of the work you've been doing with other arts groups across the state. We were in an equity group of leaders of organizations that, to me, was a really powerful personal experience when George Floyd was murdered, and you just have played a real big role in the community beyond the walls of this very cool place where you get to work. So,
well, you may overstate it a bit.
Well, you're doing great. So.
I mean, I found myself welcomed by this community. I'll put it that way, and it's a great place to be, and it's been a rough few years for us in ways that none of us foresaw, but you know, I think people have pulled together.
Well, I'm sure, like most people here, I say, you should really see what it's like when it's normal. But of course, it's not going to be normal, so we'll talk a little bit about that. I wanted to start out by just getting a sense of what it's like to work in this place, because for those of us who visit, this is a place to come to disrupt. I'll give an example. A couple of weeks ago, just a whole lot was going on. Work, personal, all that. So my wife and I, it was super cold. We said, let's just go to Walker's. We came and we were seeing the show, was it upstairs, at Julie Maruto. Am I pronouncing it? Maridu, sorry. And there's a whole lot going on in my brain, and I couldn't really make order of it. And I'm standing next to one of her canvases, and all this energy suddenly starts to make sense together. And I thought, that's what I need to do in my brain. And that's kind of what Walker has been to me, is I come here to have these, for me, profound moments. What is it like to work in a place like this where, this is the water cooler and then over here is, somebody's cubicle? What do you do when you walk around this place when you're just working here?
I have those moments too. That's the beauty of it. That's what I love about working in a place like this is that opportunity to have that regularly. But I'll say that during the pandemic, when we were closed to the public, I thought, okay, art gives us that opportunity. And so there were afternoons where I would come in, because I'm the director, I could come in and see the galleries and look at the art. And it wasn't the same, without people to share it with and to be with people in the galleries and in that space. And I think that's like, it reminded me that, museums and cultural centers are really spaces of convening. Yes, of course, it is about those individual moments of, revelation or, just profound clarity or whatever that is, or just seeing a new perspective, whatever that is. But it's like, it doesn't mean, it can mean a lot, but it means so much more with someone else.
As we kind of all crawl out of the holes that we've been in for a few years here, it's logical for people to say, okay, I've got to go back to my office or my kid's school, or I've got to go to the grocery store. There may be this tendency to say, eventually I'll get back to museums. Why should we put that further up on the priority list? Why is this a good time to come to a museum?
First and foremost, exactly because of what you said, because it gives you that opportunity. I think that idea of, for me, I think to get out of your head, we've all been in our own head so much for so long, to get out of our own heads and sort of see different perspectives on the world and different futures and different, just ways to look at what's right in front of us. Right. And I think so much, and I think the Walker has a history of showing work that does get at some of, the real, profound conditions in which we find ourselves, right? So whether that's about, bridging difference, cultural, racial, others, or, how we're dealing with the environment, artists that, contemporary artists are often grappling with those questions. And so the Walker platforms those ideas and is often engaging with those issues through the work that we show, whether in the galleries or on the stage in McGuire Theater or through cinema. In all of those forums, artists are exploring all of those and trying to help us. I truly believe that artists have ways of approaching this that give us that frame some of the issues differently and allow us to maybe come up with other ways to approach some of the things we're grappling with, whether that's emotional or political or social, any of those things. So I think museums offer us a space to do that.
Well, it's really an incredibly ambiguous time, so it's either a comforting or an uncomforting thing to have all that ambiguity around you. I mean, I really love it. How has that impacted what decisions you make about what comes here? And I know obviously you plan out a few years and such, but how is this moment impacting what's going to be in this building today and ongoing?
I think that, because we're engaged with contemporary art, in a certain way, I don't think the what changes that much. Because I think the artists and the Walker program have always grappled with a lot of the things that have now been laid bare, that everybody's realizing, oh yeah, we really have to be engaging with these issues. So I don't know if it changes so much what we're doing, but I do think it changes the context in which people are approaching it and gives us some opportunities to open some conversations differently.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think back to some of the era where there was a great deal of controversy around the performing arts program here for pushing the limits when Karen Finley and so all of these others were out there. It was a period of time that was very different than now, whereas now the outside is pushing the limits. And I don't know whether the tendency is to have Walker make sense of that or to lean right into the very, very big questions outside.
I think different artists I think different artists approach this differently. So some of them are about sort of pointing to things and just making sure that it's clear to everybody what are we looking at here. But we also, as you said, are in a moment where everybody is looking at things from so many different perspectives. It's not, positions are important. Like how you're framing those questions are important. And I think for an institution like the Walker, we are identifying artists who take particular positions, who are really thinking about, maybe not prescribing the solution, but framing the problem. I think the best artists help us ask better questions.
Give people an insight into these institutions we have taken for granted that are critically important parts of this community. Nothing should be taken for granted right now. What has it been like from the business sustainability side of Walker? And what should we know as people who care about this institution and want to perpetuate it? I'm imagining it wasn't easy to navigate through this period, right?
No, that's clear. It was not easy. I don't think that's going to be a surprise to anyone.
No headline.
No, but I think that I arrived, in 2019, and one of the things that I wanted to do was to sort of think about building earned revenues for the institution as a way both to, financially make it more sustainable financially, but also because I think people want to support the things they care about, like at whatever scale they can, right? So whether that's a basic membership or buying a ticket to something or, supporting in that way is always like a signal that you value something. So I thought that is also a way to signal how much people value us. So, but then what we, with the pandemic, there became very little opportunity for earned revenue. It's, we knew before that it's volatile, like something like mini golf, which is a great source of funds for general operating funds for the Walker, is on the terraces during the summer, and lots of people have their first experience at the Walker, bringing their kids to play mini golf, and then they come to the galleries and they have a whole different experience. So that can be a lovely thing, but a few rainy weekends in the summer can actually kill it from a financial perspective. And so it's quite volatile. So it was really the philanthropic community that got us through this stretch, and I think will continue to be extremely important to us. So I think in terms of like what can people do right now? I think the first step is just come. Like if you haven't been to visit any of these cultural organizations, if you have some time on a Saturday or Thursday evening or something, come visit and bring a friend. And especially if you've had a good experience, tell a friend.
Am I right in inferring that there were donors who stayed with you, but the earned income, the revenue, the smaller memberships?
I mean, earned revenue just dropped like a rock. You know, it went, I mean, I think for us it was $4 million a year that we just disappeared. And memberships, you know, they were a little bit more steady, and they're starting to come back. I think that's important. But yeah, so it was absolutely that contributed revenue. And we had donors who showed up and said, you know, I'd like to make an additional contribution this year because I know you're having a hard year. I know you need to make it through this. So we really appreciated that. That made a huge difference.
Local art. What are there any trends you're seeing emerging, or is a certain type of work or message coming more clearly through here? I mean, I'm asking you to compare it to where it used to be in San Francisco. It's obviously really a different place.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say at this moment because I think we are in such a different moment. Like, I don't know that it's so specific, but I do think that artists, like everyone in the Twin Cities, are quite aware of the complicated moment and the real serious, profound issues we have to deal with. That the world is not this, like, we don't all move through the world in the same way, and everybody's really aware of that, and I think that's coming through. And I think a lot of concern about, like, what is that, concern, but also like optimism. Like, I think, I actually, this is one of the things with artists that I find that no matter what subject matter they're addressing, like climate change, nuclear war, which unfortunately has become something we have to keep thinking about now, again. But I think that artists, because they're makers, they're always moving forward. Like, there's an optimism in that, I think, which I actually draw a lot of inspiration from.
It's a fascinating observation to think about both challenging assumptions on race and challenging this community, and whether it's coming through a prism of hope or not, as you were talking about that. We did a small grant to an amazing group of volunteers who just cataloged and stored all of the boards that were put on buildings that were boarded up, and to capture that moment about what was being said. And I think now finding a way to capture the moment that comes after is going to be really fascinating.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you bring that up, and it's interesting because a lot of people approached us in that moment and said, oh, there are all of these boards, and you collect contemporary art, maybe you should acquire them. And I think we heard really loud and clear, like as this was coming up, and we have obviously a lot of artists on our staff who were very active in those communities during the summer of 2020, and we heard loud and clear that they did not think it was the Walker's role. You know, that work is from the community. So I'm thrilled that you've been able to support, you know, artists within that community, like preserving that work. And but I think that's the appropriate place for that to happen. But it did get us thinking about, you know, what could we do? Like, how do we support these artists working in this community? Because to me, that summer, it was just, there was so much great work happening, whether it was like people actually making art or just helping clean up their communities after fires and damage, and or doing, you know, poetry readings just to help give people, you know, a moment of reflection and healing. Or, you know, artists were doing so much work that was just uncompensated. So as we started to think about, like, what do we do about that, we did this grants program where we, you know, and this goes to actually like where are some of these groups doing great work that we look to. We identified 10 BIPOC-led community organizations and asked them to nominate artists for grants. And we redirected some of our acquisitions funds to do $5,000, no strings attached, just thanks for the good work you're doing in your community kind of grants. And I think that was a really, it was both, I think, obviously helpful to artists who maybe just needed to pay their rent or do something while they were doing all this really important work in the community, but also a learning experience for us. Like, it was an opportunity for us to be in conversation with artists that we wouldn't necessarily have identified through our usual curatorial research. Right. And that's been really valuable, and I think helped us grow as an organization.
This has been a tough moment for arts, and things that, as I mentioned, we take for granted, like Walker, should not be taken for granted. How do you look out in the future of arts in this town, and can this continue to be an arts-centered community in this moment?
I absolutely think it can. I think it is. And I think that the way that people have worked together has demonstrated that. We talked a little bit about the way contributed income sort of got us through this moment and positioned us for recovery. And I think, that to me signals that it's valued, that these places are valued, and we're not taken for granted in that moment. So that gives me optimism, and the work we've done with colleagues. So, it's always, I hate to try, it sounds a little like Pollyannish to find that silver lining, but in all of that, when we all had to shut down, and we started to think about, like, how are we going to reopen? And, back in the spring of 2020, we thought, like, 3 or 4 months we'll all be open again. Right. And how do we do that? How do we make people comfortable coming back? How do we reopen? What guidelines do we need to put in place? What's best practices from public health perspective? And so we gathered, a group of us got together, cultural organizations, and initially sort of the larger institutions, but quickly we realized that, this was really an issue for organizations throughout the state of all different sizes and types. So we formed this coalition, Minnesota Arts and Culture Coalition is what we're calling it. And it's a group of about 80 organizations from around the state, everything from children's museums, science museums, art museums, theaters, orchestras, choirs, all types of organizations, history centers, originally it was to sort of say, like, what do we need to do to reopen? But we started meeting by Zoom, and we had weekly meetings. Quickly we all reopened and realized, well, that's the tip of the iceberg of what we could learn from each other. Right. And I think about the fact that as someone new to this community, I arrived in 2019, and in the period, over 2020, I got to know these leaders of cultural organizations from around the state in a way that I would have if we wouldn't have been meeting by Zoom all that time. And I think, the silver lining is that we got to meet each other, and now we can sort of share information and share resources, and we have a network that can work together. And as you know, thanks to your early support, we're working to mount a campaign to try to really highlight what all the cultural offerings that exist in the state and welcome people back to these spaces.
I want to finish by talking just a little bit about family, because when people think about Walker, they often don't recognize that for those of us who've raised kids in this community, this is an amazing haven on Saturday mornings and many other times too, because the programming is so good. And I think right now about kids who've been out of school or had school off and on and this and that and that moment. Tell me a little bit about where your family and youth programming is right now and how that's been impacted by this crazy moment.
Well, I have to give enormous props to our education and public programs team, because they immediately recognized that struggle, like back in 2020, and pivoted to trying to figure out how they could deliver, curriculum guides to teachers and art kits to students. So, Chase came forward and gave us a grant to be able to create art kits, and we distributed thousands and thousands of art kits to all, through the St. Paul public schools and Minneapolis public schools. And we've done lots of virtual programming, people can pick up art kits and then do projects at home. We're back to doing Free First Saturdays again. And, it's been great. I think that, but it is a challenge because the kids aren't vaccinated.
Yeah.
And so that, that adds a layer that we have to be mindful of. So while we've relaxed some of our mask requirements in general, like on Free First Saturdays, we require masks because we need to protect those kids. So, but I think, we just get great feedback from the families who need, the opportunities of what to do in this moment and where to go and where you can be and get the kids, get that stimulation for the kids has not been so easy. So yes, we definitely are offering that and welcome those families.
Okay, well, thank you for all the great work you're doing, and we just appreciate Walker quite a bit. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.